Hey everyone, welcome to Interviewer Insights brought to you by Career Companion. We're here with Christie. We've just heard her career journey. If you haven't checked it out, go have a listen. It's fantastic to see how she got to where she is. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Sam, for having me.
And so Christie was telling us she's hiring about, what, five open roles right now?
That's correct.
Wow. And then how many of you already recruited before these five?
Yeah, so in my team, in our operations team, I've recruited probably around four or five. But as the company's scaled at a really exponential rate, there's been this instant demand for extra resourcing. Hence why I'm very, very deep in recruitment and processes right now. So
Perfect. So the best time to ask you all these questions. So
that's it.
I'll get straight into them. So when you are interviewing, is it more of a casual or is it more formal and structured?
Yeah, so when I interview, I try to almost score a little bit of a balance of both, where I will go into the interview with a rough structure in mind. And when I say structure, I mean very, very bare bones baseline. So I'll start off, especially if it's the first time, of casual conversation, icebreakers, getting to know a bit about the candidate, and then I'll have a list of certain attributes or characteristics or skills that I want to test for. And often I'll have some example questions to help me assess those sorts of skills, and then leave time for questions at the end. But I think in my experience with the roles that I've been hiring for, I try to keep it more of a casual conversation and sometimes do go off script, just depending on the candidate, how they present. And it really depends on how vocal the candidate is. You'll have some candidates that are quite short in their responses and others that are a lot longer and fluent. So I always like to keep that level of being able to roll off the cuff a little bit, just to allow for times where you might have a candidate who's really, really fluent and answers, two questions in one go, and you might just want to probe into certain areas. But yeah, put it simply, it's a vague structure with room for flexibility.
Yeah, awesome. And what type of job titles are you recruiting into your team?
Yeah, so I'm recruiting for a couple of customer support roles, have a couple of so clinic onboarding and experience personnel, so people that are going to come help us develop the systems to bring in our enterprise deals, large clinics that we bring on, and ensuring that they have a really, really smooth end-to-end experience and scaling that system. And then I also have a few operations slash kind of technical operations people who are going to sit at the back end of our customer support system, looking at the data, optimizing it. So a few different roles on clinic onboarding, operations, and customer support success.
Super interesting. No, that's really cool. And what's your interview process like? You don't need to go into it too much, but how many rounds are you going through before you're making that decision?
Yeah, so right now we have quite a few rounds right now. So we're trying to find a really nice balance between making sure that we assess each candidate thoroughly and make high quality decisions whilst not creating really arduous processes. So generally our recruitment processes are 2 to 3 rounds. There might be a form that people fill in to begin with, which will ask them certain questions. It might ask them to film kind of a 2-minute video telling us why they're a great fit for the role. And then the first interview might be a kind of get to know you, ask some preliminary questions just to assess that they have the basic skills to do the role. And then the second interview is kind of a second round slash culture fit interview where we might bring in another person in our team, a people person or someone else that the candidate might be working with closely, in which we'll ask more situational, behavioral based questions, leaving time for them to ask questions at the end. And that way we can assess that the candidate has the technical skills and aptitudes to do the job, but also they fit on a cultural and personality basis too.
Cool, fantastic. And for yourself, that leads into the next question. Throughout those interviews, what are some examples of immediate red flags or any red flags at all that come up?
Yeah, so for me, immediate red flags are you're late to the interview or you get the time wrong, because that just shows that you lack attention to detail or you might lack some time management skills. Other things include body language. I find that if people generally, especially when you're introducing yourself as a recruiter and you're talking a bit about the company, if they seem disinterested or their posture is a bit off and they might be slouching, that's a sign that you might just be viewed as a number to them and they're not truly interested in the role. And I think another one might be the placement of where they're conducting the interview. So these days we have a world where a lot of interviews are being done remotely. I certainly conduct a lot of interviews remotely, and if I see people sitting on the couch or in a loud cafe or in their backyard where all you can hear is trees ruffling, wind, that's usually an indicator that this person isn't serious about the position.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to touch on two things on that that I wanted to ask. With the with them being late. So I always tell people, if you're going to be late, let the person know. I mean, if they're letting you know in advance that, hey, there's a bit of traffic or there's this unforeseen thing, is that turn a red flag into a green flag?
Absolutely. I think if someone has the courtesy to let you know beforehand that they are going to be late, I definitely don't view that as a red flag, because this is life. Life happens sometimes. As you said, there might be people stuck in traffic, or they might have some sort of unforeseen circumstances which affect the flow of their day. So we definitely don't hold any grudges against candidates in that respect. I think as long as they're able to give notice. And don't get me wrong, there's times where people are late and they don't show up due to a real emergency or something that's happened, and that happens, and that's not something that, of course, that we hold grudges for.
Yeah, perfect. And you brought up the busy cafe. So I actually had a similar thing to this happen recently, but I think what they did was the right thing, and I'd love to get your insight to this. So they had an interview scheduled, and they go, look, I've got some implementations I've got to do. I'm in the office Monday to Friday. I can't do anything outside of work hours because you guys aren't interviewing outside of work hours. Would it be okay it's a bit of a busy cafe, would it be okay if I went there? And they said that to me, and I said, look, 100% ask the hiring manager. I'm sure they're going to be fine with that because you brought it up beforehand and given reasoning. Is that, again, something that I guess it comes down to communication, right? If they had that communication, are you still put off by the busy cafe?
Yeah, so in that situation, to be honest with you, I'm not put off. And I think the thing that stands out, especially in the example that you just gave, is the initiative and care that they took to let you know and check that it was okay. So if I'm putting myself in the position, and I always try to do that, put myself in the position of the candidate, where they know they have an interview, they want to put their best foot forward, but there are situations outside of their control that are inhibiting that, they might be in a position where they need to do the interview in a busy cafe. And if that is the only way for them to make ends meet and make it work, especially given that there might not be other availability, or that might be the only time that works for them, I think for me, if they take that time to let you know and make sure that that's okay, I think that's more than what you could ask. And to me, that's an indication of actually a really strong candidate.
Yeah, perfect. And I'm glad you brought with that and sort of added to that, because believe it or not, I've had actual candidates, because I arrange the interviews with the hiring managers, turn around and say, hey, look, I'm just not available. I'm going to have to pass on this opportunity. And it's because they're actually, they just think that it's going to be too difficult. And I always tell them, just ask the question. Totally. And like you said, you've just really confirmed that everyone's understanding as long as you have that communication at the start, and it's better than missing out on an opportunity.
Absolutely. That's so important. And I do think that interviews are very much a two-way process, where as much as you're interviewing the candidate is also interviewing you, and whether they want to work at that company as well. So if they feel like they're able to email you and say, hey, is this okay? Then as a candidate, that makes me feel good knowing that, okay, this company is actually understanding and they're willing to accommodate me in this instance.
Amazing. And next question, have you ever hired somebody who's not necessarily been in the same line of work? So for example, that I always use is an accountant who goes, you know what, I want to be a product manager. And if you have, what did they do to make you go, okay, let's take a bit of a risk here and hire them into this role?
Definitely. So this has actually happened on multiple occasions in my experience, and I personally don't have anything against that at all. And I think that that's quite a courageous thing for a candidate to do, is to put themselves forward in a role where they might, on face value, looking at the job description, they might not feel completely competent enough in, but they're taking a shot. Why not? And I think for me, especially, one of the biggest things that I look at in a candidate is general behaviors and characteristics, as opposed to years of experience and degrees on a piece of paper, for example. And I think I've always really optimized for passion and energy, enthusiasm, work ethic, the ability to be a problem solver, and how much of a quick and adaptive learner you can be, as opposed to how many years of experience you have in product management, for example. Because I think even when I look at people like myself, and like other people that I've worked with who came into a field with not a lot of experience in that, but when they came in with the right approaches and the right attitudes, and they showed those sorts of characteristics and they say to you, I'm actually new to this, I've not done this before, and they prove to you that they are a good problem solver, they have good mental frameworks, they can learn quickly, they're willing to take feedback and take instruction, and they are committed to their own personal growth. I think that's a really, really solid indicator that that person is going to be a successful hire for you. And that is definitely evidence. And I say that from firsthand experience of interviewing a couple of people who come into an operations or a customer success role with a more accounting or data heavy background.
Okay, awesome, amazing. That will be a sigh of relief for a lot of people who are looking to transition into another role. So that's great. What sort of questions would you like the candidate to be asking you? Obviously, we always say, like you mentioned before, it's a two-way street, right? You should be interviewing the person as much as they should be interviewing you. But there's always the question at the end, do you have any more questions for us? What sort of questions do you like the candidates to ask in that scenario?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are two main things that I love it when candidates touch on. It's firstly the culture of the organization, and secondly, it's what type of skills and the type of attributes that the recruiter is hiring for. So for example, just to delve into that a little bit, I really like it when people ask about the culture, because it allows you to speak about that and talk about your own and your colleagues' experience about that. And if there's any questions or concerns that the candidate has, it's a perfect opportunity for them to lay that on the table. And a lot of the time, I find that candidates just want to know that they are walking into a psychologically safe environment where they are going to feel supported if they bring up problems. And there's going to be people that they can talk to if they have questions. And I think they want to know that. And that's kind of, leads on to that first point, is it's really great when people ask about the growth of individuals within a company. I find that when people ask that question of what does my growth trajectory look like, or how do you guys facilitate professional development at your company, that's a really good indicator that this person is looking at a long-term future at the company and they want to grow with the company. And it's just about setting the frameworks for them to be able to do that. And I think to my second point about the types of skills that this interviewer is looking for. So in some recent interviews I've done, I've had the candidates say to me, is there anything that I've said today or anything that you think is lacking in my skill set? That is a golden question, in my opinion, because if there is a problem, it's a great time for the recruiter to say, yeah, so this is exactly the archetype that we're looking at for this role. This is where you sit. I would want to know, I'm not sure that you have this skill. And if they have that, then it's a great opportunity for them to jump in and say, okay, well, this is how I can alleviate that sort of concern for you. And then as an interviewer, you can then have a really clear picture around if that person is able to bridge that gap, if they have the skill, and even if they don't have the skill, is that going to be a blocker if you end up hiring them?
Yeah, I love that. That is actually my pro tip that I give all of my candidates as their interview prep, is to ask that question. But like you said, you've got to be ready to deal with an objection on the other end. So no, fantastic. And my next question is, which we get asked a lot, because a lot of people just get told they haven't got the job because they're not the right culture fit. How can you tell if somebody's a good culture fit for your team? Obviously, it's going to be personal to yourself, but how do you sort of identify that?
Yeah. So I think in my experience, a lot of the time that I've identified that is firstly through the candidate and the way that they present themselves, body language wise, facial expression wise in the interview, but also through the types of questions that they ask. And then how well, and in every single interview, at some point in the recruitment process, I will ask the question of, why do you want to work at Heidi? And the way that they respond to that question tends to give off a lot of information. So especially in a first round interview, if you're a recruiter and you're giving context about the company, the way that they respond to that and the way that their facial expressions display will give you insight into, does this person align with your values? The second thing is that, especially in the way that they speak and when you speak about the company, in the way that people respond, you can almost instantly tell if they're a fit with your values. Like, are they respectful? Do they value openness, honesty, transparency? Are they transparent about themselves and their own experience and where they feel like their strengths lie, where they feel like their limitations might lie, what they think might be the biggest challenge coming into the role? And also delving into a little bit about where they see themselves. And going back to my response to the previous question is, if they're asking, what does my professional development look like at this company? Again, that's a good indicator that they are invested in the company, they are interested, and this is how they see themselves growing in. I think another green flag is when someone has come in and they've done research about the company and they've come into the interview saying, oh, I really like how you guys do this. It's so interesting because this. So I think for anyone, just being able, and the recruiter most of the time will let you introduce yourself and explain why you want to work at that company at the start of the interview. And I think that is your golden time to really show how your values are and really align with the company's values and why you would be a really great asset to that company and fit in. So there's some things that are quantifiable in the sense that you can measure, okay, does this person value that? But other times you really do have to go off intuitive feel. And I think if you can have a really casual conversation with the recruiter at the start, they might throw in an icebreaker and you might just both have a little bit of a giggle, things like that. And even the way that they look at you, they might be nodding or grinning. That's a general, good indicator that they might be a good culture fit.
Yeah, perfect. Amazing. No, I love that. That's a really good detailed overview. And like you said, it just really I guess the way that they can display their culture is in the questions that they're asking. So that's some really good feedback. I really appreciate that. The other question I have, which I always like to ask, is, do you think that people need to have a degree to be considered for your role? And the second question is, because I did have one person say, no, but my company does require it.
Good question. So I think the answer to this question really does depend on the role that you're hiring for. So if you are, for example, in my shoes and you're hiring for an operations, customer success, sales role, anything that doesn't require a really technical set of skills, I would say having a degree is not essential. And to be perfectly honest, in my experience, when I've reviewed people's resumes, or 9 times out of 10, we'll look at, again, provisioning that I'm recruiting for the right role here. I will always look at their experience, their real world experience and skills, as opposed to the degree that they have on paper. And I think the way I see it is, if someone has 4 years of work experience doing the thing that I'm hiring for and having the skills that I'm looking for, as opposed to someone who has 1 year of work experience but an extra 2 degrees, or 2 degrees versus no degree at all, I will opt for the person with no degree but actually has the real world skills, because in my mind, I am more convicted that they are able to fulfill the role to the better ability because they've done that before and they've acquired the skills. On the flip side of that, I think if you're an engineer, or you're hiring for a medical role, or a lawyer. In those situations where it's a lot difficult for someone to learn on the job, and you do need someone with the book experience in that respect. So to answer that, yeah, I think it really does matter, but as long as there is no specific set of skills that is unable to be obtained other than through studies, I would generally just, opt for work experience as opposed to a degree on paper.
Yeah, perfect. Fantastic. And look, if they've got both, that's even better. If they've got a degree and the work experience, then awesome.
Totally.
But no, I completely agree with you. I mean, I personally don't have a degree, and I'm lucky that people have looked at my experience in the workforce prior to, the other people who had a degree. So I agree with you, and thank you to the interviewers like yourself who consider that. And the last question, which is very controversial, which I always, again, love to ask, is do you think references are important to making your hiring decision, and do you conduct them at your current workplace?
Yeah, that is a very big question, one with definitely a lot of controversy. So in my opinion, and especially in the roles that I've recruited for, I do not do reference checks. And there's a couple of reasons why, and I'll explain that. So the first thing is that I believe that if I have done a thorough enough recruitment process and I've tested all the skills in the candidate, and I have the conviction that this candidate is going to fulfill what the role that I'm hiring for, in my mind, there's no need to do a reference check. The second pillar to that is that oftentimes I think I ask the question of, is there any doubt in the candidate that I am looking for? And if there is there a way for me to qualify that or to discount that other than a reference? Because I will find that oftentimes reference checks, if someone has put someone down as a reference, you are not, as a recruiter, 100% sure of the relationship between that person. And chances are, if I'm a candidate and I've put a reference down and I've given that to my future employer, potentially, I'm going to be listing out a reference that I know is going to sing my praises. In more senior roles, when you're hiring kind of exec level, I think there might be a case to say that it is more required, especially if this is a more kind of higher risk hire where you're hiring for a very specific skill set. It's quite a niche industry or role, and you do require years of experience. Then you do want that added layer of, I guess, social proof that, yep, this person has done this before, they're capable, and this is the reasons why. But at the same time, I think if you've conducted a thorough enough recruitment process, you should be able to review those sorts of skills, in that process and pick up on any red flags before that.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And it's funny because I've asked quite a few people this question now, and somebody said exactly the same as you. And they said, but the one thing that I do actually like a reference for is to ask one question. They're like, if I had to do a reference, I would only ask this one question, and it would be, are there any tips and tricks for managing this person? And I was like, because I was the same as you, I'm like, look, reference, they're just going to give the best reference that they can. It's usually going to be somebody from 2 or 3 years ago, so it's not too relevant, and they never usually give their current one because they don't know they're looking. But he goes, look, even if it's from somebody or 1 or 2 years ago, I'll just do the reference and just literally ask the one question, which is, what are the good ways to manage this person?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great question to ask if you have to do the reference check.
Yeah.
And like you said, a lot of the time that this person's current employer might not know that they're looking, so they would never put them as a reference. And the reference that they do provide might not be as relevant. But I think on that, that is also a question that I found quite works to actually ask the candidate directly when they get the job, saying, how do you like to be managed? And I think that's something that I've learned in leadership, is that you can't take a cookie cutter approach to people management. Every single person is so different in how they want to be managed, how they want you to work with them. And if you have someone and you coach them and you work with them on being really attuned to the ways that they learn, and how they respond best to feedback, you'll learn that really quickly, and you can start to tailor your management approach. Because I have different people in my team, some who respond really well to positive reinforcement, other ones who you need to be a bit more direct and they'll respond. So it's about finding that with each person, that kind of sweet spot. And I think you can find that pretty quickly early on, especially if they're open to you about it and not just helps guide the way that you manage them into the future.
Very, very wise words. You sound like you'd be a fantastic boss and manager, so hats
Thank
off
you.
to you. Those are all my questions. So thank you again so much for your time, and good luck filling those 5 roles. I'm sure with, if they're meeting you and getting an insight to the business, I'm sure they won't be live for very long.
Thank you, Sam. You're too kind. I appreciate your time.